I sat alone in my college apartment after my MBA graduation ceremony, scrolling through Instagram while still wearing my cap and gown. The posts that appeared on my screen made my stomach drop. There was my entire family surrounding my younger sister Emma at some fancy restaurant holding up a banner that read, "Surprise Italy trip for our graduate." My mother's comment below the photo read, "She's the only one who makes us proud," with 3 heart emojis. I stared at my phone, remembering how none of them had attended my graduation despite months of reminders. The silence in my apartment felt deafening. I quietly opened my banking app and logged into the family trust account I had been managing for years. The glow from my phone screen illuminated the empty pizza boxes and textbooks scattered across my coffee table. I had spent the entire day alone watching classmates celebrate with their families, while I sat in that auditorium by myself. My cap and gown felt heavy now, like a costume I was wearing for a play nobody came to see. I scrolled through Emma's Instagram story frame by frame, studying each detail like evidence in a crime scene. There was my father Paul beaming as he handed Emma an envelope. My mother Linda wiping away tears of joy. My uncle Robert raising a champagne glass. Aunt Sandra recording everything on her phone. Even my cousin Tyler was there, the one who never showed up to anything family-related unless there was free food involved. 6 months ago, I had created a group chat specifically for my graduation. I sent them the date, the time, the location. I mailed formal invitations to everyone. I called each family member personally, explaining how much this degree meant to me, how I had worked 3 jobs to afford it while managing their financial crisis. The irony burned in my chest. I was the one who had dropped out of my original master's program 6 years ago when Dad had his stroke. Mom had called me crying, saying they were drowning in medical bills and business debts. The family lumber company was hemorrhaging money, and someone needed to step in before they lost everything. "Just temporarily," she had promised, "until we get back on our feet." I was 22 then, naive enough to believe that family always came first. I moved back home, took over the books for the lumber business, and spent the next 4 years rebuilding their finances from the ground up. I negotiated with creditors, streamlined operations, and invested their savings wisely. By the time I finally returned to school, their net worth had tripled. But according to my family, none of that mattered now. Emma was the star. Emma, who had dropped out of 3 different colleges. Emma, who had never held a job longer than 2 months. Emma, who still lived at home at 25 and spent her days posting lifestyle content on social media. I opened my messages and scrolled back to find my graduation announcement from December. 47 people had responded with congratulations and excitement. My family's responses were buried at the bottom, "Maybe," from Mom, "If I can," from Dad, and complete silence from Emma. The restaurant in the Instagram photos was Giovanni's, the same place where we used to celebrate my academic achievements when I was younger. Before Emma became the center of their universe, before my accomplishments became invisible, I clicked on the comments under Emma's post. Strangers were congratulating her on her graduation, though I knew for a fact she had never completed a degree program. Family friends were asking about her amazing achievements. And my parents were responding with elaborate stories about her bright future. My phone buzzed with a credit card alert. $47,000 charged to the family account. The account I personally guaranteed. The account I monitored and maintained. The account that existed because of investments I had researched and managed. Emma's Italy trip cost more than my entire yearly salary at the consulting firm where I worked 60-hour weeks. More than the tuition I had just finished paying off through student loans. More than the emergency fund I had been building for the family's supposed financial struggles. I stood up and walked to my bathroom mirror. The young man looking back at me still wore his graduation cap, but his eyes looked older than his 28 years. This was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. Instead, I felt like I was staring into the face of someone who had been played for a fool. My phone rang. For a split second, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe someone had realized their mistake. Maybe they were calling to apologize, to explain, to invite me to join them. It was a telemarketer. I hung up and returned to Instagram, screenshotting every photo, every comment, every detail of the celebration I was never invited to. The celebration that was happening at the exact same time I walked across that stage alone, shaking hands with professors who kept asking where my family was. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not an accident. This was not poor planning or miscommunication. This was a choice. They had chosen Emma's fake celebration over my real achievement. They had chosen to spend my money on her trip rather than spend their time on my graduation. I opened my laptop and logged into the banking system with administrative access. Every transaction, every transfer, every payment flowed through accounts I maintained. For 6 years, I had been the financial backbone of this family, and they had just made it crystal clear how much that meant to them. The math was simple and brutal. While I lived in a $500 apartment eating ramen noodles to save money for their emergencies, they were spending thousands on Emma's whims. While I worked weekends and holidays to build their security, they were planning elaborate surprises that excluded me entirely. I closed my laptop and looked around my tiny apartment. My diploma sat on the kitchen counter, still in its folder, waiting for a celebration that would never come. My cap and gown hung on the back of a chair like a deflated balloon. But something had shifted in those last few minutes. The hurt was still there, sharp and deep, but underneath it was something else, something that felt like clarity. For the first time in 6 years, I was seeing my family's priorities with perfect vision. And for the first time in my adult life, I was ready to match their energy exactly. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of headache that comes from crying yourself to sleep. My graduation cap was still sitting on my nightstand, a reminder of yesterday's humiliation. But instead of wallowing, I did something I had never done before. I decided to investigate. I made coffee and opened every financial account I managed for the family. What I found made my stomach turn. For the past 2 years, while telling me they were barely getting by and needed my continued support, my parents had been funding Emma's lifestyle at a level that would make trust fund kids jealous. $3,000 per month in direct deposits to her checking account, payments for a luxury apartment downtown that I had never seen, credit cards in her name with limits higher than my annual salary. But that was just the beginning. I found receipts for Emma's high school graduation party. $12,000 spent on catering, decorations, and a DJ for a girl who barely passed her classes. The guest list included over 100 people, and the photos showed an elaborate backyard setup with professional lighting and a chocolate fountain. My own college graduation had been acknowledged with a $50 check and a gift card to a gas station. I pulled up phone records, next cross-referencing them with the family plan I paid for monthly. Mom called Emma every single day, sometimes multiple times. Hour-long conversations about everything from fashion advice to celebrity gossip. The last time she had called me was 2 months ago, and that was only because she needed me to explain a bank statement. Dad's calling pattern was even more telling. Weekly calls to Emma, always lasting at least 30 minutes. The last call to my number was from Christmas, and it had lasted exactly 4 minutes. I dug deeper into the financial records, following paper trails I had never bothered to examine before. What I discovered made me question everything I thought I knew about my family's situation. The lumber business was not struggling. It was thriving. The investments I had recommended were performing exactly as projected, generating substantial monthly income. The medical bills from Dad's stroke had been paid off 3 years ago through insurance settlements I had negotiated. My family was not financially vulnerable. They were financially comfortable, bordering on wealthy. And they had been lying to me about it for years. I found statements for investment accounts I did not even know existed, properties owned free and clear, retirement funds that were fully maxed out. My parents were not the struggling small business owners they pretended to be when asking for my help. They were millionaires. But the most devastating discovery came when I accessed the security camera system I had installed at their house during Dad's recovery. The cameras were supposed to be for his safety to monitor for falls or medical emergencies. I had forgotten they also recorded regular household activity. I scrolled through months of footage looking for patterns. What I saw broke something inside me. Regular dinner parties, where Emma brought friends over always when they knew I would be working late. Holiday decorations being put up for celebrations I was never told about. Birthday parties for Emma that looked like magazine spreads complete with professional photographers. In one particularly painful clip from 3 weeks ago, I watched my family sitting around their dining room table planning Emma's Italy trip. They discussed which restaurants to book, which cities to visit, which hotels would be most Instagram-worthy. They talked about it like it was a business meeting complete with spreadsheets and printed itineraries. At one point in the video, Dad mentioned that they should probably tell Jesse something about their travel dates in case he needed to reach them for business matters. Mom responded by saying they would figure that out later, and changed the subject to Emma's wardrobe needs. They had been planning this trip for months. Months during which I had texted about my graduation, called about my graduation, begged them to put it on their calendars. They had been planning Emma's fake celebration during the exact time slot they knew I needed them most. But the worst part was how happy they looked, how natural and loving their interactions were with each other, and how completely absent I was from their family dynamic. Watching those videos was like discovering that the family I thought I belonged to was actually an exclusive club that had never intended to include me. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the parking lot of my modest apartment complex. Yesterday, I had thought I was making sacrifices for people who cared about me, but were going through a difficult time. Today, I realized I had been funding the lifestyle of people who saw me as an ATM with legs. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking someone had finally remembered to check in on me after graduation. It was a notification from my credit card company alerting me to another large charge on the family account. Emma had apparently decided to extend her Italy trip by 3 days, booking a luxury hotel suite in Rome that cost more per night than I paid for rent. I screenshotted the notification and added it to the growing folder of evidence I was building, because somewhere between yesterday's humiliation and today's investigation, I had realized something important. I was done being the family's secret banker. I was done being their emotional afterthought. And I was definitely done funding a lifestyle for people who couldn't even be bothered to show up for the most important day of my academic career. But I was not going to confront them emotionally or make any hasty decisions. I was going to do what I did best: plan, carefully document everything, and execute a strategy that would protect my interests while forcing them to face the consequences of their choices. After 6 years of putting their needs first, it was time to prioritize the one person in this family who actually deserved my loyalty and investment. Myself. 3 days after Emma's Italy photos stopped updating, I drove to the family house using the key I had kept since moving out. I knew they would not be back for another week, which gave me time to look for answers to questions I was finally ready to ask. The house felt different walking through it with clear eyes. Instead of seeing the warm family home where I had grown up, I noticed the expensive artwork that had appeared over the years, the high-end appliances that had been necessary purchases for the business, the luxury furniture that had been justified as investments in our image. All of it paid for with money I had helped them earn and manage. Dad's office was my first stop. I had always respected his privacy, even when managing the family finances. But respect had to be mutual, and I was learning just how one-sided that relationship had become. His desk was unlocked, probably because he never expected me to go through it. Inside the drawers, I found the usual business paperwork, tax documents, and correspondence with clients. But tucked behind a stack of old invoices was a small key that did not match anything I recognized in the house. It took me 20 minutes to find what the key opened. In the back corner of the office closet behind winter coats and old sporting equipment was a metal filing cabinet I had never noticed before. The contents of that cabinet destroyed every assumption I had ever made about my family's honesty. The first folder contained mortgage paperwork for the family home. According to the documents, my parents had refinanced the house 18 months ago, taking out a $200,000 loan against the property they had owned free and clear for 15 years. The loan application bore my signature, my social security number, and my financial information. The problem was, I had never seen these papers before in my life. My signature had been forged with enough skill to fool a bank, but I knew my own handwriting well enough to recognize the subtle differences. My parents had stolen my identity to take out a massive loan, using my excellent credit score and stable income as collateral for money I would never see. The second folder made me physically nauseous. Bank statements for accounts in my name, accounts I had never opened. Checking and savings accounts that showed regular deposits and transfers, all managed without my knowledge or consent. Over the past 3 years, nearly $100,000 had moved through these secret accounts. Money that had been taken from my personal savings through automatic transfers I had never authorized. Money that had been moved into investments under my parents' names. Money that was legally mine, but practically theirs. The third folder contained documents I recognized but had never fully understood. When I turned 21, my grandfather had died and left everything to me in his will. At the time, my parents had explained that the inheritance was complicated and I would need to sign temporary management papers until the estate was settled. I had trusted them and signed the papers without reading them carefully. Looking at those documents now with 6 years of financial education behind me, I realized what I had actually signed. Not temporary management papers, but permanent transfer documents. My inheritance, worth over $300,000 at the time of Grandpa's death, had been legally transferred to my parents. Forever. I had signed away my birthright without realizing it, trusting people who were actively planning to steal from me. But the final folder was the one that broke me completely. Inside were printed emails between my parents, Emma, and several family members discussing me like I was a business asset rather than a human being. The emails went back 4 years and contained conversations that revealed the depth of their deception. Jesse is too soft and too loyal to ever question what we tell him. Mom had written to Emma. As long as we keep him feeling needed and responsible, he will keep solving our problems for free. Dad's response was even more calculated. The key is making him think we are struggling while Emma thinks we are successful. Jesse responds to guilt and duty. Emma responds to privilege and pride. We can keep both of them happy by lying to both of them differently. Emma's email showed a different side of my sister than I had ever seen. I know Jesse works hard, but he chose that boring life. I chose to be fabulous. Why should I feel bad about getting what I deserve? The email thread continued with detailed discussions about managing my emotions, controlling my access to information, and maintaining the illusion that they needed my help. They referred to me as the family ATM and joked about how naive I was to believe their financial sob stories. One email from Uncle Robert made my hand shake with rage. You have trained Jesse perfectly. He thinks taking care of you is his duty as a son, and he will never stop as long as you keep him feeling guilty about leaving you behind. The final email in the folder was from 2 months ago while I was studying for finals and working extra shifts to pay for graduation expenses. Mom had written to Emma, Jesse is getting too smart about the finances. We need to start planning our exit strategy before he figures out what we have been doing. Once Emma is settled in Europe, we can blame business losses and force Jesse to use his inheritance money to bail us out. After that, we can cut him loose and claim he mismanaged everything. I sat in Dad's office chair holding papers that proved my family had been planning to frame me for embezzlement and leave me with nothing. They had spent years systematically stealing from me while planning to destroy my reputation and my future. My phone rang, breaking the silence. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway, needing to hear a human voice that was not plotting against me. Is this Jesse? Yes. This is Detective Rodriguez with the Financial Crimes Division. We have been investigating some irregularities with mortgage applications in your name. Would you be available to answer some questions? I looked around the office, surrounded by evidence of crimes I was only beginning to understand. Actually, I think I have some information that might help your investigation. As I scheduled a meeting with law enforcement, I realized that my family's betrayal was not just personal. It was criminal. And they had been stupid enough to document everything in emails and financial records that would stand up in court. For 6 years, I had been the victim of a long-term fraud scheme, orchestrated by the people who were supposed to love me most. But now I had evidence, and I had resources, and I had every legal right to protect myself from further harm. My family thought they had trained me to be their willing victim. They were about to learn just how wrong they had been. I photographed every document in that filing cabinet with my phone, then carefully returned everything to its original position. My hands were steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. 6 years of financial management had taught me the importance of documentation and evidence, and I was going to need both. Detective Rodriguez agreed to meet me the next morning at the police station. But first, I needed legal counsel, and I knew exactly who to call. Derek Morrison had been my roommate during my undergraduate years back when we stayed up late arguing about business ethics and dreaming about changing the world through honest work. Derek had gone to law school while I was rebuilding my family's finances, specializing in white-collar crime and financial fraud. We had stayed in touch over the years, though I had never imagined I would need his professional services. Jesse, what the hell? Derek's voice was a mixture of shock and anger after I explained the situation. Your family has been running a multi-year identity theft and embezzlement scheme. This is serious federal crime territory. We met at his office that evening, spreading the evidence across his conference room table like pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture neither of us wanted to see. The forged mortgage alone is worth 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Derek explained, examining the documents with a prosecutor's eye. Add in the identity theft, the fraudulent account openings, and the inheritance scam, and you are looking at decades of potential sentences for each of them. What are my options? Derek leaned back in his chair, considering. Legally, you have them dead to rights. You could press charges tomorrow, and they would be arrested within a week. But if you want to be strategic about this, we can use the evidence as leverage to force restitution and behavioral changes without destroying their lives completely. Why would I want to protect them after what they did? Because you are not them, Derek said simply, and because criminal prosecution might not get your money back. Asset forfeiture and restitution through the courts can take years, and there is no guarantee you will recover everything. If we handle this privately, we can force them to return everything immediately and set terms for ongoing relationships. I spent the rest of the evening working with Derek to develop a comprehensive strategy. We would document everything, build an airtight case, then present my family with a choice: criminal prosecution or private restitution, under terms I would dictate. But first, we needed to stop the bleeding. Derek helped me contact the banks and credit agencies to report the fraudulent accounts and freeze any further unauthorized access to my information. We filed police reports to establish an official record of the crimes, even though we were not ready to press charges yet. The next step was protecting whatever assets remained. Derek connected me with a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking stolen funds and identifying hidden assets. Within 48 hours, we had located every dollar my family had taken and traced the money to its current location. Some of it was recoverable immediately through account reversals and credit disputes. Some of it was tied up in investments that would need to be liquidated. And some of it had been spent on things like Emma's lifestyle and the family's living expenses, which meant my parents would need to pay it back out of their legitimate assets. While we were building the financial case, I was also gathering intelligence about my family's day-to-day activities. The security cameras I had installed years earlier were still recording everything, and the footage was automatically backed up to cloud storage systems I controlled. What I saw in those recordings confirmed everything the emails had suggested. My family had been living two completely different lives: the struggling small business owners they presented to me and the wealthy socialites they actually were. I watched hours of footage showing Emma bringing different boyfriends to the house, each one believing she was a successful college graduate with wealthy parents. I saw my parents hosting elaborate dinner parties for business associates, bragging about their financial success and their brilliant investment strategies. In one particularly revealing conversation, I watched Dad explain to a neighbor how proud he was of Emma's accomplishments, while dismissing my graduation as just another degree that will not amount to anything. But the most valuable intelligence came from an unexpected source. While reviewing the security footage, I discovered that my cousin Marcus' Uncle Robert's son had been visiting the house regularly when I was not around. Marcus and I had been close as children, but our relationship had cooled over the years for reasons I had never understood. I decided to reach out to him directly. "Jesse," Marcus said when he answered my call, "I have been hoping you would figure this out eventually." We met at a coffee shop halfway between our apartments, and Marcus told me a story that filled in missing pieces of the puzzle I had been assembling. "Your parents did the same thing to my family 15 years ago," Marcus explained. "They convinced my dad to let them manage some investments, then used forged documents to steal his inheritance from our grandmother. When Dad tried to fight them, they threatened to destroy his business reputation and turn the whole family against him. Why did not anyone tell me? Your parents made sure we were cut off from you completely. Every time we tried to reach out, they intercepted our calls and emails. They told you we were jealous of your success and trying to cause trouble. They told us you were aware of what they were doing and had chosen to side with them." Marcus had been trying to gather evidence against my parents for over a decade, but he lacked access to their financial records and business documentation. My evidence combined with his historical knowledge gave us a complete picture of a family that had been running financial scams for generations. "They are planning to do to Emma what they did to you," Marcus warned. "Once she gets too expensive to maintain, they will find a way to blame her for their problems and cut her off completely. Emma does not realize it yet, but she is not their golden child. She is their next victim." That night, I lay awake thinking about Emma. For years, I had resented her for being the favored child, for receiving love and attention that I had to earn through financial contributions. But now I realized that Emma was not my parents' favorite. She was their product. They had kept her dependent and naive on purpose, never teaching her real skills or encouraging her independence. They had created a beautiful, charming young woman who could attract wealthy men and create the appearance of success without any substance behind it. Emma was not their beloved daughter. She was their long-term investment in social manipulation. I felt sorry for her, which surprised me. But I also knew that feeling sorry for her would not protect me from the damage she had already helped them cause. Derek called me the next morning with an update from the forensic accountant. "We have traced everything," he said. "The total amount stolen from you over 6 years is $412,000. That includes your inheritance, the unauthorized loans, the fraudulent account transfers, and the forged mortgage proceeds. How much of it can we recover? All of it if we play this right. Your parents have more than enough legitimate assets to cover full restitution. The question is whether you want to take everything they have or just get your money back." I thought about that question for the rest of the day. I could destroy them financially and legally, leaving them with nothing and facing decades in prison. I could take a middle path, recovering my money while allowing them to keep their freedom and some of their assets. Or I could walk away entirely and build my life without them. But there was a fourth option that appealed to me more than the others. I could force them to face the consequences of their actions while giving them an opportunity to become better people. I could use their own manipulation tactics against them, creating a situation where they had to choose between punishment and transformation. That evening, I called Derek with my decision. I want to give them one chance to make this right voluntarily. We are going to present them with evidence of their crimes and demand full restitution plus behavioral changes. If they agree to our terms and follow through completely, we keep the criminal prosecution off the table. If they refuse or try to manipulate the situation, we turn everything over to law enforcement immediately. Derek smiled. I was hoping you would say that. It is risky, but it is also the right thing to do. They taught me that family takes care of family, I said. Time for them to learn what that actually means. My family returned from Italy on a Tuesday evening. Their social media accounts filled with photos of gondola rides and museum tours funded by money they had stolen from me. I waited until Wednesday afternoon to spring my carefully planned trap. I sent a group text to my parents and Emma. Emergency family meeting tonight at 7. Critical business situation requires immediate attention. Come to the house, prepared to discuss major financial decisions. The responses came quickly. Dad asking what kind of emergency? Mom wanting to know if she needed to bring anything. Emma complaining that she was tired from traveling but agreeing to attend. I arrived at the family house an hour early to set up. Derek was already waiting in his car down the street ready to join us when I sent the signal. I placed a small recording device on the dining room table and made sure the security cameras were capturing everything clearly. When my family arrived, they looked relaxed and happy, still glowing from their vacation. Emma was wearing a new designer outfit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. My parents seemed refreshed and carefree, like people without any serious responsibilities or concerns. So what is this emergency about? Dad asked, settling into his usual chair at the head of the table. I opened my laptop and pulled up the falsified financial reports Derek and I had prepared. The documents showed a catastrophic portfolio collapse, massive investment losses, and immediate debt obligations that threatened the family's financial survival. Our investment accounts have been targeted by sophisticated market manipulation. I began keeping my voice steady and professional. We have lost approximately 80% of our liquid assets, and our creditors are demanding immediate payment on several outstanding loans. The color drained from Mom's face. Emma looked confused, like someone had started speaking a foreign language. How is that possible? Dad demanded. You said the investments were safe. I said they were diversified, not guaranteed. When institutional investors coordinate attacks on specific market sectors, even the strongest portfolios can collapse overnight. I showed them charts and graphs that looked official, but were completely fabricated. Declining asset values, margin calls, and debt obligations that required immediate cash infusions to avoid bankruptcy. How much do we need to raise? Mom asked quietly. $400,000 within the next 72 hours, or we lose everything. The silence that followed was heavy with panic and calculation. I watched my family process the information, seeing their brains work through the implications and potential solutions. What about our emergency funds? Emma asked. Frozen due to the ongoing investigation by our creditors. I lied smoothly. Business assets, leveraged against loans that are now underwater. The house, second mortgage payments are due immediately, and the property value has declined below the loan balance. Dad was turning red, a combination of stress and anger that I recognized from his authentic stroke 6 years earlier. But this time, I felt no sympathy for his distress. There has to be something we can do, Mom said desperately. I pretended to consider our options, flipping through pages of fake documentation. There is one possibility, I said slowly. If we can access the funds from Grandpa's inheritance, we might be able to cover the immediate obligations and buy time to restructure everything else. What inheritance? Emma asked. Dad and Mom exchanged a look that I pretended not to notice. Jesse inherited money from his grandfather years ago, Mom explained carefully. We have been managing it for him until he was ready to take control of it. How much money? Emma pressed. Enough to solve our current problems, Dad said firmly, clearly hoping to end that line of questioning. I leaned forward, putting on my best concerned expression. The thing is, I will need documentation showing that the inheritance is legally accessible. Bank statements, investment records, transfer authorizations. Everything has to be perfectly legitimate for the creditors to accept it as collateral. Of course, Dad said quickly. We have all that paperwork. And I will need signatures from everyone acknowledging that using the inheritance money is a last resort to save the family from bankruptcy. Legal protection in case the creditors try to come after us personally later. Mom nodded eagerly. Whatever you need, honey. That was when I texted Derek. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I stood up to answer it, returning with Derek in tow. Everyone, this is Derek Morrison, the attorney representing our creditors. He is here to witness the document signing and explain the legal implications of our situation. Derek looked appropriately serious and official in his dark suit and briefcase. My family had met him years ago during college, but they clearly did not recognize him in his professional capacity. Mr. Morrison, Dad said nervously, we appreciate you coming here personally. Given the severity of your financial situation, my clients wanted to ensure that all parties understood the consequences of defaulting on your obligations. Derek replied in his most intimidating lawyer voice. What happens if we cannot pay? Emma asked. Derek opened his briefcase and pulled out official-looking documents. Criminal charges for fraudulent borrowing, asset forfeiture to satisfy outstanding debts, and personal bankruptcy that will destroy your credit ratings permanently. But if we use Jesse's inheritance money, Mom asked hopefully, that depends on whether the inheritance is legally accessible and properly documented. Any irregularities in the transfer or management of those funds would constitute additional criminal violations. I watched my parents' faces as they realized they were trapped. They could not access my inheritance money without admitting they had stolen it. They could not refuse to help without revealing that they had been lying about our financial situation. And they could not escape the consequences without confessing to crimes that would destroy them. We need to discuss this privately, Dad said, gesturing toward the kitchen. I am afraid there is no time for delays, Derek interrupted. My clients require signed commitments within the next hour, or they will proceed with criminal prosecution immediately. My family huddled together in the corner of the dining room, whispering frantically while Derek and I pretended to review legal documents. I could hear fragments of their conversation. Tell him the truth. We had no choice. He will understand? When they returned to the table, Dad looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Jesse, we need to tell you something about your grandfather's inheritance, he began slowly. What about it? When you were younger, you signed some papers that transferred the money to us temporarily. We have been using it to cover family expenses over the years, thinking we would pay it back eventually. You used my inheritance without telling me. We were planning to replace it, Mom added quickly. We just needed time to generate enough income from the business. How much did you take? Most of it, Dad admitted. But we can pay it back now if that is what it takes to save the family. Derek leaned forward. Are you saying that you have been managing Mr. Jesse's inheritance without his knowledge or consent? It was temporary, Mom insisted. We were going to tell him when he was older and more financially mature. When exactly did you plan to tell me? I asked, letting genuine hurt show in my voice. We were waiting for the right time, Dad said weakly. And using my money to pay for Emma's lifestyle was part of that plan. The question hung in the air like a bomb that had not exploded yet. Emma looked back and forth between my parents and me, clearly not understanding the implications of what was being revealed. What lifestyle? She asked. The $3,000 a month you receive, I said quietly. The luxury apartment, the credit cards, the vacations. Where did you think that money came from? Emma stared at my parents with dawning horror. You told me it came from the business profits. It did, Mom said desperately. The business has been very successful thanks to Jesse's management. But you just said the business is failing and we are facing bankruptcy, Emma pointed out. Derek closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have described constitutes wire fraud, identity theft, and fiduciary misconduct. I am required by law to report these admissions to the appropriate authorities. Wait, Dad said desperately. There has to be another way to handle this. What are you suggesting? Derek asked. We pay back everything we owe, including Jesse's inheritance. Full restitution plus interest, plus whatever penalties are appropriate. In exchange, we handle this as a family matter rather than a criminal case. Derek looked at me. Mr. Jesse, these are serious allegations against your family members. Are you interested in pursuing a private resolution? Or would you prefer to let law enforcement handle this matter? I pretended to consider the question, letting the silence stretch until my parents were visibly sweating. I want my money back, I said finally. All of it. Plus, I want a formal apology and a commitment that this kind of deception will never happen again. Of course, Dad said quickly. Whatever you need. And I want Emma to understand exactly what has been happening here because she deserves to know the truth about how her lifestyle has been funded. Emma was crying now, finally understanding that her entire adult life had been built on money stolen from her brother. Jesse, I had no idea. I thought you were helping the family voluntarily. I was helping, I said gently, but I was not volunteering to fund your personal expenses while living in poverty myself. Derek stood up and walked toward the door. I will give you all 24 hours to reach a private agreement. If Mr. Jesse contacts me tomorrow with confirmation that full restitution has been arranged, my clients will consider the matter resolved. If not, we proceed with criminal prosecution immediately. After Derek left, my family sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The trap had worked perfectly. They had confessed to everything on camera with a lawyer as a witness under circumstances that made denial impossible. But looking at their faces, I realized that the confession was only the beginning. The real work of rebuilding trust in relationships was just getting started. And I was not sure any of us were ready for what came next. The 24-hour deadline created exactly the pressure I needed to force real change. My family spent the night in crisis mode, making phone calls to banks and investment firms to liquidate assets and arrange transfers. By morning, they had compiled a complete inventory of everything they owned and calculated how much they could raise in cash immediately. Dad called me at 8 a.m. We can have $300,000 in your account by noon today, he said, without any greeting or pleasantries. The rest will take another week to arrange, but we can provide written guarantees for the full amount plus 20% interest. That is a start, I replied. But money is only part of what I need from this family. What else do you want? I want everyone at the house at 10 a.m. for a family meeting. Not a crisis management session, not a negotiation, but an actual conversation about how we move forward from here. Jesse, we are doing everything you asked. You are returning money you stole from me. That is not the same as fixing the relationship damage you caused. When I arrived at the house, I found my family arranged around the dining room table like defendants waiting for a verdict. Emma had clearly been crying all night. Mom looked exhausted and defeated. Dad appeared to have aged several years since our meeting with Derek. I sat down across from them and pulled out a folder containing everything I had discovered over the past week. Bank statements, forged documents, email printouts, and security camera screenshots. I arranged the evidence on the table like a prosecutor presenting a case. Before we talk about money, I need you all to understand exactly what you did to me, I began. Not just the financial crimes, but the emotional manipulation and psychological abuse that made those crimes possible. I walked them through 6 years of systematic deception, showing them their own emails and financial records as evidence. I made them listen to recordings of themselves mocking my devotion to the family and planning to frame me for embezzlement. I forced them to confront the reality of their choices and the impact those choices had on my life. Emma broke down completely when she saw the emails discussing her as a product and an investment in social manipulation. She had thought she was the beloved daughter, but the evidence showed she was just another victim, being groomed for a different kind of exploitation. They were planning to marry me off to some wealthy man and use my husband's money to fund their retirement, she sobbed. I was not their favorite child. I was their retirement plan. Mom tried to defend their actions by claiming they had been protecting the family's financial security. But I cut her off with documentation showing their actual net worth. They were not struggling small business owners. They were millionaires who had been stealing from their son to fund an unnecessarily lavish lifestyle. You could have lived comfortably on your legitimate income, I pointed out. You chose to steal from me because you wanted luxury, not because you needed basic survival. Dad finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. We told ourselves we were borrowing the money temporarily. We convinced ourselves we would pay you back eventually. After you framed me for embezzlement and destroyed my reputation, after you used up my inheritance and left me with nothing, we never meant for it to go that far. Your emails say otherwise. You were planning to scapegoat me and disappear with my money. That was not temporary borrowing. That was a long-term theft scheme. The conversation continued for 3 hours, with my family gradually accepting responsibility for the full scope of their betrayal. But acceptance was not the same as understanding, and understanding was not the same as change. That was when Derek arrived with the real surprise. Jesse asked me to bring someone who might provide additional perspective on this situation, Derek announced as he walked through the front door. Behind him was my cousin Marcus, carrying a briefcase full of documentation about our family's history of financial manipulation. Hello, Uncle Paul, Marcus said quietly as he took a seat at the table. Aunt Linda, Emma. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. My parents knew exactly why Marcus was there, and they knew he had evidence that could destroy them completely. Marcus has been documenting this family's financial crimes for 15 years, Derek explained. Identity theft, inheritance fraud, business embezzlement, and tax evasion. Jesse's case is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern that goes back generations. Marcus opened his briefcase and began laying out documents that showed a family history of stealing from relatives, manipulating trust funds, and using forged signatures to access money that did not belong to them. Your parents stole my inheritance when I was 23, Marcus told Emma and me. They convinced my father to let them manage some investments, then used forged documents to transfer everything into their personal accounts. When my dad tried to fight them legally, they threatened to destroy his business and turn the whole family against him. That is not what happened, Dad protested weakly. Marcus pulled out court documents from the lawsuit my uncle had filed years earlier. This says otherwise. You settled out of court for $50,000 rather than face criminal prosecution, but you never returned the $200,000 you stole. And you made sure I was cut off from Jesse so he could not learn about your history. I looked at my parents with new understanding. That is why we stopped seeing Marcus's family. You told me they were jealous and trying to cause trouble. We were protecting you from unnecessary drama, Mom said defensively. You were preventing me from learning that you were criminals who had done this before. Derek spread additional documents across the table. Based on the evidence Marcus has provided combined with Jesse's discoveries, we can now prove a conspiracy spanning multiple decades. This is not a family dispute about money management. This is organized criminal activity that has victimized multiple family members. Emma stared at the documents in horror. How many people have you stolen from? It is not stealing when it is family money, Dad said desperately. Actually, it is, Derek corrected. Family relationships do not exempt you from theft and fraud laws. If anything, the trust violations make the crimes more serious. Marcus leaned forward. The statute of limitations has not expired on most of these cases. If Jesse decides to press criminal charges, the investigation will uncover everything you have done to multiple family members over the past 20 years. What do you want from us? Mom asked, finally abandoning any pretense of innocence. Derek answered before I could speak. Full restitution to all victims, not just Jesse. Formal acknowledgement of criminal wrongdoing. Cooperation with ongoing investigations into potential tax fraud and money laundering. And permanent supervision of your financial activities to prevent future crimes. That is impossible, Dad said. We do not have enough money to pay back everyone. You will, after you sell the house, liquidate your investment accounts and transfer ownership of the lumber business to Jesse as partial compensation for the inheritance you stole. The room fell silent as my family processed the scope of what was being demanded. Complete financial transparency, full asset liquidation, and permanent oversight of their activities. It was essentially financial bankruptcy combined with legal supervision. But the alternative was federal prison for multiple felonies, and Derek made sure they understood that clearly. You have two choices, Derek continued. Accept our terms for private restitution and supervision, or face criminal prosecution for organized financial fraud. We have enough evidence to convict all three of you on multiple felony charges. Emma raised her hand like she was in school. What about me? I did not know any of this was happening. Marcus smiled sadly. You are probably the youngest victim, Emma. Your parents have been using you as unknowing bait in long-term financial scams. Once you understand how they manipulated you, you will probably need therapy to process the psychological damage. But I am not going to prison. Not if you cooperate with restitution and commit to building an honest life going forward. Derek opened his briefcase and pulled out a formal agreement he had prepared. This document outlines terms for avoiding criminal prosecution, full restitution to all victims within 90 days, transfer of major assets to compensate for stolen inheritances, monthly financial reporting to ensure compliance, and mandatory family therapy to address the psychological manipulation that enabled these crimes. What if we refuse? Dad asked. Then Marcus and I file criminal charges tomorrow morning, and you spend the next decade fighting federal prosecutors instead of rebuilding relationships with your children. I watched my parents read through the agreement, seeing their faces change as they realized how completely their world was about to be transformed. They would keep their freedom, but they would lose their financial independence and social status. They would avoid prison, but they would live under constant supervision and scrutiny. It was not the complete destruction I could have imposed, but it was accountability that would force genuine change. We need time to consider this, Mom said finally. Derek shook his head. You have had 6 years to consider treating your son honestly. The time for consideration is over. Sign the agreement now, or we proceed with criminal prosecution. Dad looked at Mom, then at Emma, then at me. If we sign this, will you give us a chance to rebuild our relationship with you? I will give you the opportunity to earn back my trust, I replied. Whether you succeed is up to you. He signed the document. Mom signed next, tears streaming down her face. Emma signed last, her hand shaking as she wrote her name. Derek witnessed the signatures and made copies for everyone. Congratulations, he said dryly. You have just avoided spending the rest of your lives in federal prison. As my family began the process of liquidating their assets and arranging restitution payments, I realized that justice was not about punishment or revenge. It was about creating consequences that forced people to face the truth about their choices and develop better ways of relating to each other. My family had spent years believing they could manipulate and control me without consequences. Now they were learning that actions have results, relationships require honesty, and trust has to be earned through consistent behavior over time. The money would be returned, the legal issues would be resolved, and the family dynamics would be restructured completely. But the real question was whether any of us would be able to build something better from the wreckage of what we had destroyed. 6 months later, I stood in the same college auditorium, where I had received my MBA alone and unwanted. But this time I was not alone. This time I was completing a certificate program in financial crimes investigation, and my entire family was in the audience to celebrate my achievement. Emma sat in the front row wearing a simple blue dress she had bought with money from her job at the local community college admissions office. She had started working there after completing a customer service training program, and for the first time in her adult life, she was supporting herself through her own efforts. The transformation had not been easy for her. Learning to live on a budget, developing practical skills, and building authentic relationships without the safety net of stolen money had been painful and humbling. But it had also given her something she had never experienced before: genuine self-respect. "I never knew how good it felt to earn something yourself," she had told me a few weeks earlier. "All those years I thought I was special because expensive things came easily to me. I did not realize that easy things do not make you feel proud of yourself." My parents sat beside her, looking older but more relaxed than I had seen them in years. The stress of maintaining lies and managing multiple deceptions had taken a toll on their health and happiness that none of us had fully recognized until it was gone. Dad had returned to working in the lumber business, but now as an employee rather than an owner. I had taken over the company as part of the restitution agreement, and I had promoted several longtime employees to management positions while Dad focused on the hands-on work he actually enjoyed. "I forgot how much I liked building things instead of just managing money," he had admitted during one of our monthly family therapy sessions. "For years I was so focused on getting rich that I stopped doing the work that made me happy." Mom had started volunteering at a nonprofit organization that helped families recover from financial fraud, using her experience with manipulation and deception to help other people recognize warning signs and protect themselves from scams. "It feels good to use my skills for something positive instead of destructive," she had said. "I spent so many years learning how to manipulate people emotionally. Now I can teach them how to protect themselves from people like I used to be." The restitution process had taken 4 months to complete fully. My family had liquidated most of their luxury assets, downsized to a modest apartment, and transferred ownership of major investments to compensate for the money they had stolen from Marcus and me. But more importantly, they had committed to the ongoing therapy and financial supervision that would prevent them from repeating their patterns of deception and manipulation. Derek had become not just my legal advisor, but also my business partner. Together, we had started a consulting firm that specialized in helping families and small businesses recover from financial fraud and embezzlement. Our first major client had been Marcus, whom we helped recover most of the inheritance our parents had stolen from him 15 years earlier. "Justice delayed is not always justice denied," Marcus had said when we finally succeeded in recovering his money. "Sometimes it just means justice comes with interest and additional protections for future victims." The security company I had started with my recovered inheritance was growing rapidly, providing financial monitoring and fraud prevention services to families who wanted to protect themselves from the kinds of crimes my own family had committed. But the most significant change was not financial or professional, it was personal. 3 months after the restitution agreement was signed, I had met Sarah Chen at a conference for fraud prevention specialists. Sarah was a social worker who specialized in helping families rebuild trust and communication after experiencing betrayal and manipulation. "Your story is incredible," she had said after hearing about my family's situation. "You could have destroyed them completely, but you chose to create accountability that gave them a chance to become better people." "I wanted justice, not revenge," I had replied. And I realized that the best way to protect myself was to help them develop better character, not just punish them for having bad character. Sarah and I had been dating for 3 months now, building a relationship based on honesty, mutual respect, and shared values about family and integrity. For the first time in my adult life, I was learning what it felt like to be with someone who valued my character as much as my capabilities. As I walked across the stage to receive my certificate, I looked out at my family. and felt something I had not experienced in years: genuine pride in our relationships. Not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. Not because we had solved every problem, but because we were facing our problems with integrity and commitment to growth. Not because the past had been erased, but because we were building a future based on truth and mutual respect. After the ceremony, we gathered for dinner at a modest restaurant that Emma had chosen because she had learned to cook there during her hospitality training program. The conversation was relaxed and authentic in ways that would have been impossible when our relationships were built on lies and financial manipulation. "I have been thinking about something," Emma said as we shared dessert. "For most of my life, I thought love meant getting whatever I wanted without having to work for it. But now I realize that love actually means caring enough about people to help them become their best selves, even when that means holding them accountable for their mistakes." Dad nodded slowly. "We spent so many years trying to make you kids happy by giving you things or protecting you from consequences. But real love means teaching people how to handle responsibility and build character." Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Jesse, I know we can never completely make up for the years we wasted lying to you and stealing from you. But I want you to know that watching you handle this situation with integrity and wisdom made me prouder of you than any amount of money or success ever could have." "The goal was never to make you proud," I replied gently. "The goal was to create relationships where pride was based on authentic accomplishments and genuine character rather than manipulation and deception." As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Sarah arrived to join us for coffee and conversation. My family had been nervous about meeting her at first, worried that their criminal history would reflect badly on me, professionally and personally. But Sarah had surprised them by focusing on their commitment to change rather than their history of mistakes. "Everyone makes bad choices sometimes," she had told them. "What matters is whether you learn from those choices and use them to become better people." Jesse told me, "You are all working hard to rebuild trust and develop healthier relationships. That shows real character and courage." Driving home that evening, I reflected on everything that had changed since that devastating graduation day 6 months earlier. The pain of discovering my family's betrayal had been almost unbearable, but it had also created an opportunity for truth and growth that would never have existed otherwise. I had learned that love without accountability is not really love at all. It is enabling and manipulation disguised as affection. I had discovered that protecting people from consequences does not help them develop character. It prevents them from learning the skills they need to build authentic self-respect and genuine relationships. Most importantly, I had realized that the most loving thing you can do for people who are harming you is to refuse to enable their destructive behavior, even when that means accepting short-term pain for long-term growth. My family had spent years believing they could manipulate me indefinitely because I was too loyal and too soft to set boundaries or demand accountability. They had been wrong about my softness, but they had been right about my loyalty. I was still loyal to them, but now my loyalty was based on their potential to become better people rather than their history of taking advantage of my love. As I pulled into my apartment parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Thank you for not giving up on us. I know we did not deserve another chance, but I am grateful every day that you were strong enough to demand better from this family." I smiled and typed back, "Family means never giving up on each other, but it also means never accepting less than what we are capable of becoming." The next morning, I woke up in my modest apartment, made coffee, and checked my bank account. For the first time in 6 years, every dollar in my accounts belonged to me. No one was stealing from me, lying to me, or manipulating me financially. But more importantly, for the first time in my adult life, my relationships with my family members were based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine appreciation for each other's character and efforts. The journey from betrayal to trust had been painful and difficult, but it had taught me something invaluable about the difference between being loved for what you can provide and being valued for who you are. True family relationships require boundaries, accountability, and the courage to demand better from each other, even when that means facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. My family had learned that lesson the hard way, but they had learned it completely. And now we were building something together that was stronger and more authentic than anything we had ever shared before. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with people you love in order to protect yourself and help them grow? Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when it means accepting short-term pain for long-term healing. I would love to hear about your experiences with family accountability and how you found the courage to demand better from your relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who might need to hear this message, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family manipulation and building authentic relationships. Thank you for listening, and remember that you deserve relationships based on honesty, respect, and genuine love. Take care of yourselves and never let anyone convince you that loyalty means accepting betrayal.